Great. Let me slide my chair in a little bit. Get comfortable. We're
Get
good.
comfortable. We're good. Well, hey, thank you very much, like I said, for taking some time to talk with me. I've been looking forward to this for a long time. And for those that who watch this that don't know, and I'll share it in print form when I post this, but this is Pastor Jim Preisig, who I've had the pleasure now of knowing. Pastor Jim, I was thinking it's been at least 10 years now since I've been coming to the summit, so I can't believe it's gone
I
by
think
so
it's more
quick.
than 10 years, Tim.
Yeah.
How old are your boys when you came?
Well, let's see. I think they were 12 and 10, so now they're 24 and 22, so it's maybe 12 years now.
Been
Wow.
great. You and your family. It's just been so cool to watch the boys grow up and mature into fine young men. It's cool stuff, Tim.
Well, thanks. Well, and our becoming part of the church meant so much to us personally and each one of us, but as a family as well. So, and it continues to be that way. So, but like I said, we could probably talk about a million things, but I've kind of been focusing on music, which is probably my greatest passion in life. And I know from hearing many of your messages over the years and serving in the praise band, I know how important music is to you. So that's kind of what I wanted to kick things off with. And you alluded to it before we hit record here that you were listening to was Yo-Yo Ma.
Yeah, yeah. In fact, Alexa, set the volume to 3. I
I
was a little
love that.
loud, and so I had to turn it down. Yes, Yo-Yo Ma is my go-to. I just find his cello work so beautiful, and the pieces that are chosen so magnificent. I got to tell you, when I went through chemo, I was in the chemo infusion room at KU, and I'd go all day on Wednesday and then a half a day on Thursday, and then just go in for a shot on Friday. And here's what I do. My wife came with me. She's just so wonderfully loving and supportive. But I would get in the room. They'd give me a Benadryl drip first, and then I'd put on my headphones and listen to Yo-Yo Ma, and it just created such an awesome sense of peace in me. There was just no anxiety. There was just the sense of being surrounded by God's love, because I really believe that music is just evidence of God. In fact, of all people, Kurt Vonnegut was going through some of my notes on music. Kurt Vonnegut, in his book, A Man Without a Country, he writes this epitaph. He says, if I should ever die, God forbid, let this be my epitaph. The only proof he needed for the existence of God was music. And just yeah, that was one of those that I highlighted and wrote down
Yeah.
years ago. And I think God lifts us into the presence of the divine. I mean, the music lifts us into the presence of the divine.
Well, and I want to come to that too, but before we go there, I agree. So did you grow up hearing music in the home? When did your relationship with music begin in your life?
That's so interesting, because my mom was a homemaker. I grew up in the 60s, and my mom always had music playing, and it was usually WRIG from Wausau, Wisconsin. So now I love to listen to Sirius XM 60s/70s, because I not only know the songs, I know the lyrics, because it just seeped in from my mom always listening to the pop hits. And music has that influence. I
Mhm.
mean, so few, I mean, I've read all sorts of things, but I have a hard time memorizing, recollecting poetry or anything else. But you start playing a song and it triggers something in the soul. And I remember the lyrics from when I was a little boy. So that's how it started. My sister had all the musical talent. She was a pianist. She has a degree in organ performance from Lawrence Conservatory.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So she got all the musical talent. I really was not talented, but I've always loved music. And the choice at home was eclectic. My dad was a big band fan. He loved, the big band sounds of the 30s and 40s. My mom loved the pop hits of the 60s and 70s. And my sister, of course, loved classical music. So it was all around me.
Very eclectic. So you never took a stab at any learning an instrument, or were you a
Yeah,
vocalist?
yeah, I did. And I probably, I played the trumpet. You had to play an instrument or sing in the choir in junior high. And so they told me I couldn't play the trumpet. Everybody wanted to play the trumpet, so they put me on the trombone. And I was so good, they promoted me to the upright bass and tuba.
Wow.
I was so bad. They thought I could do the least damage if they put me on tuba. So all through junior high, I played in the band and the orchestra. So it was painful. And then when I was in high school, I played the bass guitar briefly. We kind of put together this band that was really bad, and it was just fun and loud and
like a garage band kind of thing.
It was in the basement because the neighbors complained.
Okay.
So yeah, that's so I can't carry a tune. I can't sing worth a darn, but I just love music. It touches my soul.
Well, that's been apparent since I've known you as our pastor, and you've spoken about it many times. So, just a sidebar. What's that?
When did you get started with Tim? You're such an exquisite musician. When did you get started?
Well, I started playing music when I was 8. I started studying the violin at that time, but I started hearing music probably when I was in the womb. My dad was a voracious, passionate listener of music, and so there was always music being played. His was classical and classical only, and that's all I really knew early on. But my mom was kind of the renegade, because she would also have hidden in her cabinet, she'd have Glenn Campbell or Louis Armstrong or Simon and Garfunkel. So kind of that same, a different approach, some big band music. And so I heard a little bit of that. And my grandmother was a self-taught musician, and she taught herself to play the organ. And she loved the gospels and the spirituals and hymns and things like that. So I kind of had a full circle of it. But I started playing the violin, and then I took piano lessons. And then from there, when I was a little bit older, I kind of wanted to learn how to play the guitar. So I got an old guitar and figured out how to play some chords and became a self-taught guitar player, and then some bass. But violin was my primary instrument.
I love to listen to you on the bass. Oh my goodness. Yeah.
Thanks. It's a lot of fun.
You trigger a memory. I actually took piano lessons for 2 years with Mrs. Immigan. I still remember the smell of her place. She had this grand piano. She was a very, very prim and proper elderly soul. And finally, after one lesson, she turned to me and she said, "Jim, you are wasting my time and your mother's money. This will be your last lesson."
Well, that's refreshingly, beautifully honest, though,
She always was.
Wow. Well, I didn't go very far on the piano either. It just kind of gave me the basic framework of structure. And, that's the great, if I could do anything, it would, well, 2 things. If I could be a great singer or a great pianist, I think those would be the 2 I would really like the most. But I can't sing very well, and I was never much of a keyboard player. So, but, I still appreciate it.
The funny thing is, my mother used to punish my sister by keeping her away from the piano if she did something wrong. And she used to punish me by making me sit at the piano longer.
Oh, no.
Torture, buddy.
Torture. Well, so speaking of your sister, one of the other formidable experiences I will always remember is we moved a little bit when I was a kid, and we ended up in Austin, Texas in 1971. And we started going to the first United Methodist Church there. And they had a giant pipe organ in the sanctuary, and a wonderful organist named Charles Barnett. So that walking in and hearing this huge sound every week, it was a big influence on me, and that kind of led me to wanting to talk a little bit about how music and worship go together, and why do they go together. And I know musicians are mentioned throughout the Bible, and music is part of so I know that may be too broad to cover in a short Zoom conversation, but music and worship, as far as Christian religion, I know are intertwined inexorably. So why is that?
Intertwined and indivisible, because I think we're told in Scripture that we're to lift our voices to God. We're to sing His praises. And so I cannot imagine worship without music. In fact, some traditions are so heavily into the word, the spoken word, preaching, and they really give short shrift to music. And in fact, some theologians have been suspect of music because if it's purely instrumental, who knows what people are thinking? And there was an effort back centuries ago to want to control people's thinking in worship so they weren't wandering. And I think that's tragic because music is the song of the Spirit. And like you, my sister started studying the organ. She studied the piano basically from the time she was a little girl, but then she started studying the organ in junior high. And I remember going into the performance hall, the chapel at Lawrence University, where they had this mammoth pipe organ. And when she would play it, you could feel it on your body.
The
The
vibration, yeah.
rumbling. Yes, because there would be these huge bass pipes, and I don't know how many feet they were. They were just magnificent,
Mm-hmm.
and you could feel it just rumble through you.
Yep.
And of course, when the organ really began, it was because they were having difficulty finding musicians for worship because it took so many. Whereas the organ, you needed somebody to play it, and you needed somebody to work the pumps in terms of the wind, and so the organ was kind of a compromise, and it was resisted in the early centuries when music was used. So, getting back to music and worship, I think for some people, music is more important than the spoken word today. And for me, I think the spoken word is essential, but music is what underscores it and frames it in such a way that the spirit is receptive. In fact, of all people, this was another quote that I found for you in anticipation of our conversation. It
Love
was
it.
Friedrich Nietzsche, and his checkered past and his de-evolution into mental illness and his struggle with God.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote this in The Twilight of the Idols. God has given us music so that above all, it can lead us upwards. Music unites all qualities. It can exalt us, divert us, cheer us up, or break the hardest hearts with the softest of its melancholy tones. But its principal task is to lead our thoughts to higher things, to elevate, even to make us tremble. The musical art often speaks in sounds more penetrating than the words of poetry and takes hold of the most hidden crevices of the heart. Song elevates our being and leads us to the good and the true. Wow.
That's great. Yeah.
Isn't
Amazing.
that brilliant?
Brilliant.
I'll send
Wow.
that to you so you have it.
Yeah. Well, is music as important in other religions, do you know, as it is in the Christian tradition?
Well, I don't know other religions other than Judaism, and my understanding of Judaism is even very limited. But I know the cantors are so integral to Jewish worship, and the times that I've been in the synagogue and had the opportunity to go and hear the beautiful music that's part of their worship it's touched my soul. There's a beauty there. And I
Yeah.
think about some of the greatest musicians that have ever lived. They've been Jewish
Right.
and magnificent stuff.
And some of the great violinists of all times are are Jewish, and just,
And pianists. I
yeah.
mean, you think about it, there's just that rich heritage. And I think about
Right.
the spirit, the Jewish soul that formed the orchestra in Auschwitz,
Right.
who really saw music not only as lifting the broken spirit into healing, but an act of defiance. The excellence that they brought in that unspeakable circumstance just, I think, speaks to the heart of faith.
For sure. So I grew up in the tradition of organs and choirs, and when we went to church, we put on our Sunday best, and
Yes.
it was a big deal, and it was, very reverent and very tradition based. And so obviously in today's world with contemporary worship, now we have drums and guitars and electric basses playing and people coming in jeans. So I've kind of seen how there are certain people will go to whichever one they're most comfortable with. But it seems like the contemporary worship is the one that's gathered the most steam in the last 10 years and bringing more people to churches around the world. And what's your thought
Absolutely.
about that?
That's a trend that's really developed. Uh, it started in the 60s and 70s, but really gained momentum in the 80s and 90s. And a lot of people struggled. We had the worship wars that still kind of happen a little bit in some churches. 20 years ago, when I came to this church, we only had traditional worship. Um, and we started a service that was contemporary. And I remember an older gentleman walked out of church, and I was standing greeting people as they were leaving. And I extended my hand to shake his, and he refused. He threw up his hands like this, pointed at me, and he said, "What you're doing is contemptible." And I wasn't sure what he was referring to, because I suspected there may have been more than one thing that he was ticked off about.
Right.
I'm like, "What?" And he said, "Contemporary music." He said, "The only place for a drum set is in a tavern." And I understand where he's coming from, because his understanding of God is so transcendent that it has lost the immanent. And his understanding of worship was so formal that it really, I think, precludes movement of the spirit from my perspective. And I love traditional worship. It's what I was raised up with. I was
Right.
raised in a German Methodist church, and it was a pipe organ and a full choir, and the
Right.
pastor wore robes. And, but we sang the hymns
Mhm.
lustily, as John Wesley described it, joyously. And I think there's a place for traditional worship. I've been a champion of traditional worship. We've seen its decline across the country. And we've certainly seen it at our church. Pre-COVID, we ran about 200 people in traditional, and we ran about 1,800, 2,000 in
Yeah.
contemporary. So there's a huge gap in terms of appeal. But I also imagine a day when we see a rekindling of that spiritual serenity that is often communicated most effectively in traditional rather than contemporary. Contemporary is very high energy, and that speaks to the spiritually extroverted. They tend to really resonate with that.
Mhm.
But the people who are more contemplative, it seems that the traditional music speaks to their souls more powerfully. And as a church, I hope we always offer people great options and alternatives.
Right. Yeah, I made the shift, myself. I tell my wife when we first started coming to the church back, 12 years ago, I still struggle with wearing jeans to church. It's just something I can't do that. I can hear my mom or my grandmother, put on your suit or put on your good clothes. But I think it's taken me a while, but now I can do that and I'm okay with it. And I enjoy both styles of worship. And I look down when I'm in the contemporary and if I'm playing and I look down and when I really see the really young people maybe from the youth ministry, they're there and they get into it so much. It's really inspiring. And like, who cares what kind of music or if it's drums or organs? The fact that they're here worshiping, that's what's important.
That's where my heart's at. Because I'll tell you, I would put on cowboy boots and have country music if it was a way to touch people's hearts with the
Right.
gospel. You know,
Mhm.
what I find troubling is when people say you worship God your way and I'll worship God his way. And they infer that there is only one way
One
that's
way.
acceptable to God. And
Yeah.
that's nonsense, because the simple truth is God created us, and God transcends all of it. There is no narrow path. It is Jesus Christ. And I think that's what's so exciting about worship right now.
Yeah, and even back and I'm not a music historian or scholar by any means, but I've read enough to know that going back even to the period of Baroque music or pre-Baroque music, there were certain you know, music was basically all sacred at the time. And, you know, you play it a certain way. There's certain notes you can play. There's certain chords and notes you can't play. And you can't pair these two together because then it's the devil's music. And there's always been that, you know, struggle and people that want to like change and like, I'm going to throw this chromatic run in here and make it sound a little dissonant and shake things up. And then they would freak out about it.
Well, you're so right. And here's the interesting thing, the historical piece. Both Luther and John Wesley, Luther, the one who really broke with the Catholic Church and started the Reformation and was part of that whole Lutheran movement. And then John Wesley, who really rebelled against the staid conservatism of the Church of England and started Methodism. What they both did is they took the tunes from drinking songs.
You preached about that. I've heard that. Yeah.
Taverns, and they put sacred lyrics, and it just ticked people off everywhere. I mean, they wouldn't even let John Wesley in the churches. They made him preach outside in the cemetery, in the fields. He would preach in taverns because the important thing was to share the love of God with people who didn't know it.
Right.
So there's an exuberance to worship. And I think if John Wesley were alive today, if Charles Wesley, his brother, who was really, he was the one who wrote most of the hymns. Mm-hmm. If they were alive today, they'd probably be doing it in hip hop or some stuff that would leave people shaking their heads. What are they thinking, you know?
Yeah, I'll be curious, you know, 50 years from now, 100 years from now, what people will be talking about on this topic at that point. So.
Well, and it's interesting. They say that when you're a teenager, a mid-teenager, that's when your taste in music's really imprints, you know? And I think that's why my tastes, like yours, are so eclectic, because my family had such diverse tastes in music.
Yes.
And I mean, like, when I'm in my study right now. I love my study, and I typically listen to classical music when I'm writing sermons and things. When I'm reading, I listen to quiet jazz. In the car, I listen to 60s and 70s and sing along like an idiot. I mean, people have to see me in the car and just think that guy's lost it. But it just, you know, it releases the endorphin.
Gotta let it out.
It triggers all sorts of great stuff. And in worship, I love the old hymns. They stir my soul. And I love the new stuff. Jesse Land, our worship director, he writes such great stuff. And our worship band just does such a phenomenal job.
You're preaching to the choir. I totally agree.
These are talented folk.
Very talented. And there's so many talented people serving at the church now. It's incredible. So a couple of things you touched on. So you talked to Alexa. My other question was, how do you consume your music? Do you have records and tapes still? Do you have technology? Clearly you have Alexa, and you mentioned Sirius XM. So
it's like reading. I rarely read anything in print anymore. It's all on my iPad Kindle because I carry it everywhere. The same is true. I've got Alexa in my key rooms. I've got it at my office at church. And I've got an old Bose. You know, remember those single speaker Bose, you know, and I've got one of those that I have had for years, and it just never fails me. It always sounds great. It fills the room. I love that. And I love being able to tell Alexa what I want to hear.
Yeah.
Of course, now that she just paused to see what I was going to ask.
She heard her name. Like what?
Exactly.
It's amazing though, the ways that we can consume music now. It's so wide open, and there's things I don't even know about out there in the technology world other than Spotify and Pandora and maybe iTunes. But I still, like, you can't see them here, but I'm still reading books now that are books, and I'm still listening to my CDs and my albums. But I still have that, but I also love to just tell Alexa to play something if I'm in the kitchen cooking dinner or whatever. It's just great.
I don't even think I have a CD player anymore.
Well, I don't think they still, yeah, you're right. They don't include them in cars anymore, and you really don't, you have to search for them to buy them. So,
you know, and I always drove old cars. And my last car, it had a 6 CD changer built in, which was really cool, cutting edge technology. in the mid-aughts. But I mean, the sound in that was great. But one of the reasons I got rid of the car is the radio started cutting out on me.
Oh, no. Yeah. If the radio goes, car's got to go, right?
Yeah, exactly. I can't imagine not having music in the car.
What are you driving these days? What is your car
I'm
now?
driving a Toyota 4Runner. I got a great deal. They're indestructible. We're getting a dog. I mean, we haven't had a lab now for 6 years. We had yellow labs for 25 years, and now we're going to get a chocolate lab in May. And I needed to get a vehicle that I could go everywhere with the dog. And the thing is, with a 4Runner, you can pretty much hose them out if they get dirty. They're very utilitarian,
very practical for dog ownership. Yes,
and the
labs are great.
Labs are great, and the sound system in the Toyota is great.
Well, then you got it covered.
I've got it covered.
So I wanted to ask you about, you just mentioned when you're writing sermons. So that kind of takes me to my next topic, which is the creative process, whether you're writing a sermon or writing a symphony or writing a book or solving mathematical equations, creative minds. What is your creative process? And I don't know, how many years did you say you've been in ministry now?
38 years.
So I don't know how many messages or sermons you've written in that time, but how do you week after week after week, year after year, come up with ideas and create new messages?
That's a great question. Here's what I found in all my years of writing. The harder you try, the more difficult it is. And really, various writers have talked about their muse, listening to music, reading books, going for walks. I mean, it sounds crazy, Tim, but there are times I feel like all I'm doing is taking dictation, that the sermon comes that quickly and easily. And I've needed to get up in the middle of the night. I've needed to get out of the shower and just grab pen and paper and get it down, because I'll forget. And I was actually listening. Alexa, stop. I haven't seen Hamilton. My wife loves Hamilton.
Great.
Listen to it all the time. But the guy who wrote Hamilton talked about, I watched a segment. I guess it was a YouTube or something. I forgot what the source was, but they interviewed him about the creative process, and he talked about going to a party and struggling with what he thought was the best song in the entire musical. And it came to him on the subway, and he got to the party and he made a quick appearance, had a beer, turned and said, I've got to go because I've got to get this down. I think the creative process is really listening well enough to be receptive to how the Spirit prompts and leads. And I definitely think that is the case in terms of preaching. I read the word, the scripture that I'm contemplating using, and the scripture raises the questions. The scripture makes the correlation with the relevance for today. And like, for instance, here's a little hint of what's coming. I'm doing 2 different sermons on Easter. I'm doing the sunrise sermon, and you remember Fiddler on the Roof. Tevia's one daughter is going to get married, not by a matchmaker, but by love. You remember that whole section, that scene? And he sits down with his wife. What's his wife's name? What's Tevia's wife's name?
Oh, man.
Now, people will respond to that on the podcast.
We'll let the comment section, if you know the wife's name,
but he asks her, and it's so cool the way the original was done, because he asked her so humbly, almost shyly, do you love me? Do you remember that song?
I do.
And then they sing back and forth, and they've been married 25 years, and she thinks he's crazy to be asking, do you love me? And he is. And then they conclude, then you love me. And there's just this exuberance and joy. And I heard that, and it triggered an immediate thought. Remember in John 21, where Jesus is on the seashore, and he's at a charcoal fire, which I love. He would have been using a Weber, no gas grill.
Of course.
And he's doing bread and fish, and Peter and the disciples are fishing. They've gone back to Galilee and they're fishing. And the last time that Peter had spoken of Jesus, he had denied him 3 times. And so Jesus appears, calls him to the shore, and asks Peter, "Do you love me?" And hearing the Fiddler on the Roof song triggered a series of thoughts that just led me down that path. You know, the question people struggle with, is it possible to love God, the divine creator of the universe? And is it even reasonable to expect that God would love us? And that's what I'm talking about, Easter sunrise service at the summit. And it started by hearing a snippet from Fiddler on the
Fiddler
Roof.
on the Roof. So so inspiration can come from all sources out there. Walking in nature, listening to Fiddler on the Roof, being on the subway, like
yes, Lin Emanuel or whatever.
yeah, right.
Yeah, I mean, I'm blessed. I have fun. I just I can't. I've done this now for almost 40 years, and I feel so extraordinarily privileged. I've known the best people in the world, and I've had the chance to share life and ministry and the spiritual journey with them. And people, I mean, when I was still in school, I was a leisure minister. I liked the title to begin with, leisure ministry. It sounded so relaxed. And what it was is I did worship services at campground / resorts in northern Wisconsin for 2 summers. And I was surrounded by people who were on vacation. And folks who are relaxed on vacation are more open, receptive to talking about matters of the heart and matters of eternal significance than perhaps any other time. And I had the best conversations, the best discussions on scripture, and they would share music with me. And you'll think this is ridiculous, but it was just me. And I mean, like for big services at one campground, we'd have 400 people show up on Sunday morning on the edge of the lake at this natural amphitheater. And I couldn't get anybody to do the music, so I led the singing.
Nice.
It's so god awful. I'm astounded. I think people came just for the comic relief. I mean, I had a Jewish family who loved coming to our worship, and I think they just thought it was hilarious.
Oh my!
But then
they got a little comedy show, but then they also got the word as well. So
exactly, and I've always tried to, my approach to the scripture and my approach to life is probably a little more cerebral. But the music always balances that. I always wanted to engage people on a thinking level. And I never assume that I'm the brightest person in the room. I suspect that I'm always surrounded by people who are thinking great thoughts. So I don't know how we got there, but it was a good story.
Well, and dovetailing on that a little bit. So you have theological education. You went to college and studied theology and have that scholarly basis. So what's important how is that important to you and being the pastor that you want to be versus many pastors who are ministering out there don't have any formal training or education in theology? And is it important that you have to have it? Should you have it, or does it matter?
Ooh, that's a great question. It's actually a two-edged sword, I think. Some people who have never been to seminary have more passion and excitement and enthusiasm and a very basic grasp of the scripture. And it inspires me because frankly, there are some people who've lost their faith in graduate school because some of the people who teach theology, their understanding of God is very objective. God is the object, not the subject. And there is no intimacy, there's no personal connection. And yet I think if you're going to be effective in ministry, you need to have access to the very best thinking, the writing, the best commentaries. I went to Lawrence University for my undergraduate, And the cool thing is the conservatory is what it was, mostly known for. But the religion and philosophy department, that was where my two areas. I have a double major in religion and philosophy. They were just stellar. They were just brilliant souls. And then I went to Yale. And the cool thing is that the Institute of Sacred Music is right there. And I had some of the most brilliant people that you would ever encounter as my professors. And Henry Nouwen, a lot of people recognize Henry Nouwen. There were so many others, and they just poured great wisdom and faith into me. And so I don't presume that you have to be well educated to have a deep relationship with Christ and to be able to teach that relationship. But I believe it equips you to encounter and engage a broader, diverse congregation.
How old were you when you understood in your heart that your calling was to go to study and become a pastor?
Well, that's kind of funny because I didn't want to be a pastor. I was in the PhD track. I was intending to teach at a university because I always thought it would be cool to work 9 months a year, teach 2 classes, and smoke a pipe. Walk around campus and look wise.
Yeah.
And actually, so I was in the PhD track in terms of systematic theology at Yale, and then and felt powerfully that wasn't what God created me to do or to be, that I was to serve a church. And when I was preaching every week at the leisure ministry thing in northern Wisconsin, I went to 3 different campgrounds and preached 3 services each week, each Sunday, and did Bible study. That's when it just became unequivocally clear God called me to ministry, not to teach at the university.
And how did the door to Yale open to you when you were at Lawrence? Was that a natural next step, or did you have friends that had gone there ahead of you? Or
Actually, I applied to Yale and Harvard, and I was accepted at both. And Harvard offered me a better package to go there. But I went to see a professor that I really respected. And I still remember what he said. He said, "Jim, go wherever you want, but the best faculty is at Yale, so you choose." And I just thought, okay. And it was funny because the acceptance letter from Harvard, it looked like they spent $50 on the package. And Yale, it was next door to a mimeographed letter that said, "You're accepted. Come on."
In that blue ink you crank out and remember that?
So, and I never regret it. I would not have met my wife if I had gone to Boston. She was in New Haven. And so God had his hand, and I look back on 40 years, and God's not done with me yet. I still have ministry to do, and I'm having more fun, Tim, than I've ever had in ministry.
That's really nice to hear, because I think it would be really, I think being a minister would be, it's so much more than just delivering the message every Sunday. And I know just, a little bit about what's really going on behind the curtain, but there's so many things, and they can be so political, and they can be, you're dealing with finances, and you're dealing with people, which people are messy and challenging, and
people are messy.
Yeah. And so to hear that you've done it this long and are still enjoying it more than ever makes me feel really good.
Of course, a key factor of that is I am surrounded by the best staff I've ever had in my 40 years of ministry. Wow. I'm surrounded by the best people. Ryan Schreckengast is our executive pastor, the whole team, Robin, our administrator, Robin Dawson, the whole team. It is nothing short than superlative. And I'm blessed. I show up and just have fun, actually.
Well, that's a blessing for sure. When I show up and have fun being in the congregation as well.
And I love to see you up on the platform, just really getting into the worship and the music, buddy.
Well, 2 quick follow-ups and we'll be done. So I always ask anybody I talk to, let's talk about sports real quickly. Are you a sports fan? Are you ready for baseball season tomorrow? Or are you strictly a football fan, or do you follow sports?
I'm not much of a spectator. I played football, not well. I played basketball and baseball worse. And so, yeah, I enjoy watching with buddies, but it's not, I mean, if I miss a ball game or if I don't know what the score is or what's going on, that doesn't bother me in the least. I love to fly fish. That's kind of my sport.
Right.
Um,
And you're a golfer?
I golf badly.
So do I.
But it's fun and it's the camaraderie. You know, it's kind of like the paratrooper that hated jumping out of planes, but loved the people he did it with. You know, I play golf with some great guys and it's just fun. So
Yeah.
I enjoy sports, but I'd rather play them than watch them.
Fair enough. And then what about coffee? You probably see me have my sip of my coffee. Are you a coffee drinker?
I have a sensitivity to bitterness. And so, you know, when I went to college, I thought, now you're grown up, you got to start drinking coffee. And I
Right.
couldn't. It's just bitter to me. And I never drank coffee. My wife could not face the day without 2 cups of really strong coffee.
Likewise.
So I get up every morning and I make her coffee. That's just one of those little acts of service that just says, I love you. I hate coffee, but I love you. So enjoy.
That's great. Well, I really appreciate your insights and your time. I know you're very busy, so I won't keep you any longer, but I've been wanting to have this conversation a long time, and it's been very enjoyable, and it's meant a lot to me.
Tim, you put everybody at ease and you've made this an absolute delight. I love the way you kind of just shepherded the conversation to cover a broad range on music and beyond and just made it a joy. And so I thank God for you and the privilege of sharing this. I hope it's a blessing to the people who tune in and take the time to listen.
Well, likewise. And I look forward to seeing you at all 4 services this weekend. So
I will see you then.
There.
Blessings.
Have a great day. Blessings to you.